At 4:03 in the morning, something hit my front door hard enough to shake the hallway walls. Not a knock. A kick. Then another. I was awake before I fully understood why, but the dogs were already there before I even got out of bed. 2 low growls. Then silence. The kind of silence trained dogs make when they are not confused. When they already know exactly where the threat is. Then I heard her voice from the other side. Sharp. Loud. Angry. She said she was with the HOA. She said she had a master key. She said if I did not open the door right now, she would let herself in and deal with the violation personally. At 4 in the morning. I stood in the dark hallway listening to her threaten my front door like she owned the house behind it. She didn't. And the worst part for her was simple. By the time she made that stupid master key threat, she had already forgotten one thing every smart person remembers before trying to force their way into a secured home. Some houses wake up before the owner does. Mine had. My name is Aaron Voss, and the reason that moment did not send me into blind panic was simple. I do not live carelessly. People hear security and imagine paranoia. Cameras on every corner. Motion lights bright enough to wake the dead. A man pacing his own hallway waiting for trouble. That was never me. I just believed in knowing what stood between my front door and the rest of the world, especially in a neighborhood where too many people used the word authority like it was a skeleton key. That was why the dogs mattered. They were not loud, reckless pets that barked at passing headlights and delivery trucks. They were trained. Disciplined. Calm until calm stopped making sense. Most days, they looked almost boring. They slept near the back hall, followed routines, and ignored the kind of harmless noise that makes ordinary dogs lose their minds. But if something changed at the edge of the property, they changed first. That morning, they were already in work mode before I even put both feet on the floor. No frantic barking. No confusion. Just that deep warning sound low in their chest, followed by the kind of stillness that tells you they have identified a real threat and are waiting for your next move. That steadied me faster than anything else could have. Because fear is loud when you are alone in the dark, but discipline cuts through it. The second I heard the dog settle into position, I knew 2 things. First, whoever was outside did not belong there. Second, the situation had not yet crossed into chaos, which meant I still had control if I used it correctly. That mattered. Especially in our neighborhood. The HOA had a long history of acting bigger than it really was. Inspection threats. Rule letters. Vague claims about emergency access and community compliance. Most of it was noise, and most people folded before asking the only question that ever really mattered. Show me the rule. I had asked that question before. More than once. And every time I did, Melissa Crane hated me a little more. She was not technically the whole HOA. Not even close. But she moved through the neighborhood like she had been personally appointed to keep every porch, driveway, curtain, dog bowl, and garage door aligned with her idea of order. If she did not like something, she wrapped it in board language until it sounded official enough to scare somebody softer than me. Now she was outside my door at 4 a.m., kicking it like a woman who had finally decided fear would do what paperwork never could. Melissa Crane had been trying to get inside my life for months before she ever tried to get inside my house. That was the real pattern. The 4 a.m. door kicking was not some random burst of madness that came out of nowhere. It was just the ugliest version of a habit she had been building ever since I moved into the neighborhood. First it was the usual HOA noise. Reminder notices. Friendly warnings. Questions that were not really questions. Did I submit this? Was that approved? Had I registered those dogs? Why was my side gate locked during daytime hours? Why had I not turned over an emergency contact key like everyone else? That last one came up more than once. Melissa loved the phrase emergency access. She used it the way some people use prayer or patriotism. Something broad enough to make questioning it sound suspicious. She claimed the board needed to know which homes had backup access. She claimed certain community standards required cooperation with inspection procedures. She claimed the HOA maintained emergency entry rights in special situations. Every time, I asked the same question. What special situations? Every time, she answered with the same kind of fog. Safety. Policy. Board review. Community compliance. Big words. No paper. That was what made her dangerous. Not because she had real authority. Because she had spent years learning how to speak just close enough to authority that people stopped asking where it actually ended. Most neighbors hated dealing with her, but they still gave in. They handed over forms, spare keys, codes, explanations, just to make her go away faster. I never did. The first time she asked about a key to my house, I told her no. Not rudely. Not dramatically. Just no. She smiled like she thought I had misunderstood. She said it was not personal. It was protocol. I asked her to show me the rule. She never did. After that, everything sharpened between us. The dogs became a concern. My closed blinds became visibility issues. My camera over the garage became excessively hostile for a community setting. Once, she even implied that residents who refused emergency cooperation created liability for everyone around them. What she really meant was simple. I was not easy to manage. And people like Melissa take that personally. So when I stood in my hallway at 4:03 in the morning, listening to her voice cut through the dark while my dogs held position between me and the front door, I knew this had not started with a fake master key. It had started the day she realized I was one of the few people in the neighborhood who always asked her to prove what she claimed before I moved an inch. I moved down the hallway without turning on the main lights. Not because I was afraid to be seen. Because I wanted to see first. The dogs were already where I expected them to be. One near the front hall opening. The other slightly behind, both of them locked forward, ears up, bodies still, waiting. That was the part people never understand about trained dogs. The most dangerous moment is not when they are barking. It is when they are quiet and fully focused. Melissa kicked the door again. Hard. Then came the rattle of metal against the lock, followed by her voice, louder this time, sharper, like she thought volume could turn a stupid claim into a legal one. Open this door right now, she shouted. The HOA has a master key for emergency access. That line almost made me laugh. Almost. Not because it was funny. Because it was so completely insane that my brain needed half a second to decide whether I had really heard it. A master key? For what? A clubhouse supply room? The pool gate? Maybe a utility cabinet if the board had somehow gotten itself organized enough to manage one. But a private residence? My front door? At 4 in the morning? No. That was not authority talking. That was desperation wearing authority's clothes. I stopped a few feet short of the entry and checked the security panel first. Front porch camera live. Motion alert active. Timestamp running. She was right there on the feed, exactly as ridiculous as she sounded. Hair loose, coat thrown over sleep clothes, one hand on my doorknob, the other stabbing toward the frame like she was arguing with the house itself. And she was not alone. A man stood behind her near the walkway, half in shadow, shifting from one foot to the other like he had already started regretting being part of this. I could not see his face clearly yet, but I could see enough to know one thing. Melissa had brought a witness. Which meant she either thought this would justify her later, or she wanted backup in case I challenged her version of the night. Good. Let him watch. Because once somebody else sees the lie in real time, it gets harder to clean it up in the morning. Melissa hit the door again with the side of her fist. Then she shouted that she was giving me one final chance before she used board authority to enter. Board authority. At 4 a.m. On a private home. With no visible emergency, no police, no fire, no water pouring under the frame, no smoke, no broken pipe crew, no ambulance. Nothing except her voice and her ego freezing on my porch while my dog stood in the dark listening with the kind of patience that only makes sense when they already know the door stays closed until I say otherwise. I still did not open the door. That mattered. Because the entire scene outside was built around one assumption. Melissa believed noise could force movement. That if she hit the door hard enough, shouted HOA often enough, and kept throwing around words like emergency and authority, I would eventually do what most people in the neighborhood always did when faced with her voice. Give in first. Ask questions later. I was not most people. I pressed the camera feed larger on the wall panel and got a better look at the man behind her. Mid-40s maybe. Heavy jacket. Baseball cap pulled low. Not maintenance. Not police. Not fire. Not any kind of emergency response. Just a tired-looking civilian standing on my walkway at 4 in the morning while an HOA bully tried to bluff her way into a private house. That alone told me everything. Whatever Melissa was doing, it had nothing to do with an actual emergency. Real emergencies bring the right people. They bring urgency with purpose. They do not bring a random witness and a fake claim about a master key. One of the dogs shifted half a step closer to the entry. Not aggressive. Precise. The kind of movement that says the warning has already been issued and the next decision belongs to the person in command. Hearing that small adjustment behind me changed the whole feeling in the house. Melissa was still outside making noise, but inside, the balance was mine. The door was locked. The cameras were recording. The dogs were steady. And she was the one getting colder by the second. Then came the sound I had been waiting for. Metal against metal. Not the lock turning. A key being tested. Melissa had actually put something in my door. She jiggled it once. Then again. Harder the second time, like anger could fix bad teeth on a copied key. The lock did not move. Of course it did not. But the fact that she tried it at all changed this from stupid to serious. I hit record on the internal audio backup too. Then I spoke for the first time. Not loudly. Just enough for the porch mic to catch it clearly. What exactly do you think you're doing? The effect was instant. Melissa jumped. The man behind her stepped back. And for 1 perfect second, the entire performance outside my front door cracked wide open, because confident people do not flinch like that unless they were hoping the house was empty, asleep. Or weaker than the one they found. Melissa recovered fast, but not cleanly. That was the thing about people who build their power on bluff. The first crack always shows before the words catch up. Her shoulders tightened. Her grip slipped off the doorknob. And when she answered, the voice was still loud, but the confidence inside it had changed. She said the board had received an emergency complaint. I asked what emergency. She said there were serious concerns about activity inside the house. I asked what activity. She did not answer that either. Instead, she went right back to the fake authority. She said the HOA had the right to inspect the property. She said I was refusing lawful entry. She said if I did not open the door immediately, I would be responsible for what happened next. That was when one of the dogs let out a low warning growl. Not loud. Not wild. Just deep enough to carry through the wood and into the porch mic. The man behind Melissa took another step backward. This time, I could see his face more clearly on the screen. He looked embarrassed. Not angry. Not committed. Just like a man who had agreed to stand outside and witness something, only to realize too late that the person he followed here had not actually told him the truth. Melissa heard the growl too. Her eye shifted toward the door. Then to the windows. Then back to the lock she had just tried. That was the moment the fake master key story started dying in her own head. Because bluffing entry into a sleeping homeowner's house is one thing when you imagine confusion on the other side. It becomes something very different when the house answers back with trained restraint and a voice that is calm enough to document every lie. I told her the cameras were recording. I told her the lock attempt was recorded too. And I asked her one more time to explain, clearly, what emergency justified trying to open my front door at 4 a.m. She said the board had concerns about my dogs. That almost made me laugh. Not because it was funny. Because it was so obviously desperate. My dogs were inside, under control, silent except for the warning she had earned herself. The only real threat on that porch was the woman standing outside with a bad key, a fake claim, and no legal reason to be there. I told Melissa to step away from the door and leave my property. She did not. That was what finally made the whole thing stop feeling like HOA drama and start feeling like trespass with an audience. Most people, once they hear the word cameras and realize the homeowner is fully awake, pull back fast. Pride usually gives way to self-preservation. Melissa did the opposite. She straightened up on the porch, looked directly at the camera above the frame, and said the board would not be intimidated by aggressive animals or hostile behavior from non-compliant residents. That sentence told me she was already thinking about the morning after. Not the truth. The story. She wanted words she could repeat later. Phrases that sounded official enough to survive a retelling if the neighbors heard only her version first. Aggressive animals. Hostile behavior. Non-compliant resident. The usual trick. Turn resistance into danger. Turn a locked private door into suspicious conduct. The problem for her was simple. The audio was clean. The video was cleaner. And behind me, the dogs were still holding exactly where I had placed them, not barking, not lunging, not doing anything except proving how disciplined they actually were. The man behind her finally spoke. Quietly. He asked if maybe they should go. Melissa turned on him so fast it looked like she had forgotten he was there to help her look credible. She snapped that the board had rights and that I was forcing the issue by refusing a lawful inspection. He looked at the door, then at the lock, then at the camera, and I could almost see the moment he realized she had dragged him into something that was going to sound insane in daylight. I asked him directly if he had been told there was an actual emergency. He did not answer. He did not need to. His silence was enough. Melissa started talking over him immediately, louder now, saying I was interfering with board authority and making the situation worse for myself. But by then the rhythm of the scene had changed. She was no longer the person pressing power against a sleeping homeowner. She was a woman on a recorded porch, at 4 in the morning, standing beside a witness who no longer looked confident enough to support her lie. And that was when I decided she had talked long enough. I took my phone off the charger by the hall table and called the police. Not the HOA. Not security. Not Melissa's favorite board friend who liked to send passive-aggressive emails with words like community concern and immediate compliance in bold. The police. And the second I did, the whole balance on that porch shifted again. Melissa heard enough through the door to understand what I was doing, and for the first time since she kicked my house awake, her voice lost that polished edge she always hid behind. She started talking faster, saying there was no need to escalate, saying the board was only trying to address an urgent issue, saying I was overreacting to a lawful inspection. Lawful inspection. At 4 a.m. With a bad key in my lock. I gave the dispatcher my address, told them a woman claiming HOA authority had attempted entry into my home, and said the entire thing was on camera. I also mentioned that I had trained protection dogs inside and that everyone remained under control as long as the door stayed closed. That part mattered. Because this was not chaos. It was pressure. And pressure, when properly recorded, ages badly the moment real authority enters the picture. The man on the porch finally spoke again. This time louder. He told Melissa they needed to leave right now. She hissed something back at him that the porch mic only caught halfway, but the meaning was obvious. She was angry that he was abandoning the scene before she had won it. angry that the witness she brought to support her version was becoming the first sign that her version had fallen apart. One of my dogs shifted closer to my knee. Still calm. Still waiting. That steadiness kept me focused. Melissa could rant about board rights and emergency access all she wanted, but inside the house nothing had changed. The dogs were controlled. The locks were holding. The cameras were running. And every extra second she stayed on that porch only made her position worse. Then she made one last stupid move. She grabbed the doorknob again. Not to open it this time. To prove something to herself, maybe. To show the man behind her that she was still in charge of the scene. She twisted hard, yanked once, and hit the wood with the side of her palm. That was enough. I told her, clearly, that if she touched my door again after being told to leave, every second from that point forward would be treated as intentional attempted entry and harassment on a recorded line. For the first time all night, she went completely quiet. The silence after that felt heavier than all the kicking had. Not because Melissa had finally understood the law. Because she had run out of ways to keep pretending this was still her scene. A few minutes earlier, she was outside my front door talking like the HOA could reach through a lock just because she said the word emergency loudly enough. Now she was standing on a recorded porch at 4 a.m, beside a witness who wanted to leave. While the homeowner on the other side of the door had already called the police and calmly explained every part of what she had done. That changes a person. Especially the kind of person who has spent years leaning on people being too tired, too polite, or too nervous to push back. Melissa stepped away from the knob at last. Only one step. But it was the first honest movement she had made all morning. The man beside her used it immediately. He told her again they needed to go before the officers arrived. This time his voice was not soft or uncertain. It had the tired edge of someone who had finally stopped worrying about her pride and started worrying about what his own name would sound like if he had to explain later why he stood on a stranger's porch while an HOA board member tried to force entry with a fake key. Melissa said the board would hear about all of this. I told her good. The porch camera caught the way her face changed at that one word. She had expected pleading, or anger, or at least some attempt to soften what was happening. Instead, I was giving her the one thing people like her hate most when the bluff collapses. A clean record. No shouting. No threats. No confusion. Just timestamps, audio, video, a failed key attempt, and a homeowner who had asked the same simple question from the beginning. What emergency? She still had no answer. Behind me, the dogs remained exactly where they were, bodies still and eyes fixed toward the entry. That steadiness mattered more than almost anything else on that line. Melissa had already tried to invent a story about dangerous animals. But disciplined dogs on a quiet floor do not help a liar. They make her look worse. They prove the danger was not inside the house. It was outside, wearing false authority and hoping the dark would cover the difference. Then, from the end of the street, I heard what she heard at the exact same moment. Tires slowing on wet pavement. The second those tires slowed outside, Melissa stopped pretending she had time. You could hear it in her breathing before you could hear it in her voice. That small crack where certainty gives way to calculation. She was no longer trying to force the door. She was trying to decide what version of the night she could still salvage before real officers stepped onto the porch and saw exactly what I had already described on the recorded line. She told the man with her that they should leave. That part almost impressed me. Not because it was smart. Because it was finally honest. For the first time since she kicked my house awake, Melissa had stopped talking like a woman with authority and started moving like a woman who knew she had gone too far. The problem for her was simple. Leaving would not erase anything. The camera still had her at the door. The porch MIC still had the master key's claim. The lock still had the failed attempt. And the dispatcher had already logged the call. The man on the porch looked relieved the moment she said they should go. He took half a step back toward the walkway and glanced over his shoulder toward the street. I could tell he was hoping the patrol car might still be far enough away that this could all become a weird, ugly mistake nobody would have to explain in detail. Melissa was hoping for the same thing. Then she made the worst choice left available to her. She tried to rewrite it out loud before leaving. She said, loud enough for the camera to catch every word, that she had only come because the board believed there was a safety emergency involving the dogs and the property. She said she had tried to make contact peacefully. She said I had become hostile and uncooperative the second she arrived. That was not for me. That was for the future. For the report she would write. For the neighbors she would talk to. For the board members she would call at sunrise. But lies told into a live camera after a failed key attempt do not sound persuasive. They sound desperate. I told her the audio had started before she touched the lock. That shut her up again. The man beside her muttered something under his breath I could not quite catch, but it sounded a lot like, "I told you." Then the headlights washed across the front windows. And the porch changed from private stupidity into official timing. By the time the officers stepped onto the porch, Melissa had already switched from aggression to performance. That was the first thing I noticed in her voice. Not fear. Not apology. Performance. She started talking the second the nearer officer came into view, telling him there had been a serious HOA emergency, that she had reason to believe the property was unsafe. And that the homeowner inside had become hostile when she attempted lawful contact. She stacked the words quickly, hoping speed would do what truth no longer could. It did not. Because the officer did not answer her first. He looked at the door. Then at the lock. Then at the camera. Then at the man standing beside her, who already looked like he wanted his entire body to become invisible. Only after that did he ask the question that mattered. Who touched the door? Melissa said she had knocked. The man beside her closed his eyes for half a second. I almost smiled in the dark. Because the whole night had finally reached the point where silence was turning against her faster than any argument ever could. I spoke through the door and said the footage had audio, the lock attempt was recorded, and the false master key claim was on file with dispatch. That changed the porch instantly. One officer stepped a little closer to the frame. The other turned to Melissa. A master key for what? She hesitated. Just for a second. But a second is a long time when the truth should be easy. She said the HOA maintained emergency access expectations for resident safety. That was not an answer. The officer knew it. So did the man beside her. So did I. I told them again there was no emergency, no notice, and no consent to enter. I also said my dogs were secured, under control, and had never left position because the door had stayed closed the entire time. That mattered. Because Melissa had already tried to plant the idea that the danger was inside the house. The problem for her was that the danger was standing on the porch, still wearing her own voice. The officer asked the man beside her why he had come. He answered honestly. He said Melissa told him the HOA had legal access and that she only needed a witness in case I became difficult. That one sentence did more damage than all the kicking before it. Because now the lie had shape. Not confusion. Not misunderstanding. A plan. The moment he said that, the whole porch seemed to tighten around Melissa. Not dramatically. No one gasped. No one shouted. But the shape of the situation changed in a way she could not talk her way out of anymore. Up until then, she had still been trying to hold on to the idea that this was messy, confusing, maybe badly timed, but still somehow connected to HOA business. The second her own witness admitted she brought him there because she expected trouble and wanted someone to watch it happen, that illusion collapsed. The officers felt it too. One of them looked at the man and asked, "She told you she had legal access?" He nodded. Then the officer looked at Melissa. "And do you?" She opened her mouth, but nothing came out right away. That pause did more damage than any answer she could have given. Because if legal access really existed, she should have been able to explain it cleanly. Which document? Which rule? Which emergency? Which authority? Instead, all she had was that same fog she always hid inside when someone finally asked the question too directly for Bluff to survive. She said the board had emergency rights in certain situations. The officer asked what emergency existed tonight. She said there were concerns about the property. He asked what concerns. She said there had been prior issues involving the dogs. He asked whether anyone was injured, trapped, threatened, or in immediate danger. No, she said. That was the end of it. Not emotionally. Factually. Because once she admitted there was no real emergency, everything else about the night got smaller, uglier, and harder for her to explain. The kicking. The lock attempt. The fake key. The witness. The 4 a.m. timing. None of it looked like caution anymore. It looked like pressure. Personal pressure, dressed up in HOA language and dragged to a front door that never should have been touched. Behind me, one of the dogs shifted once and settled again against the hall floor. The sound was quiet. Controlled. Exactly like everything inside the house had been from the start. The officer asked me through the door whether I wanted to keep speaking from inside or come to a secured side window. I told him inside was fine for the moment and that all footage would be saved. He said that was smart. Melissa heard that too. And I think that was the moment she finally understood the real problem was no longer whether she could still sound official. It was that every second of her authority had been recorded failing. The officers asked Melissa to step back from the door and move down toward the walkway. That was the first visible sign that her control over the night was gone. Not because they raised their voices. They did not. But once law enforcement starts creating distance between you and the property you were trying to force your way into, the story changes fast. You stop looking like the person in charge. You start looking like the person being managed. Melissa hated that. I could hear it in the way her shoes scraped across the porch instead of stepping cleanly. I could hear it in the little edge in her voice when she tried, one more time, to say this was still an HOA matter and that she had only been acting in the interest of neighborhood safety. The officer did not take the bait. He asked her a very simple question. If there was no emergency, why were you here at 4 a.m.? Trying to enter a private residence. She started with the same answer again. Concerns. Safety. Prior issues. Board responsibility. He cut through it. Why 4 in the morning? That one landed harder. Because timing is what makes bad judgment look accidental or deliberate, and there was no good accidental reason for this. No burst pipe crew. No fire. No police request. No screaming from inside. No water under the door. No broken window. Just an HOA bully with a bad key, a witness, and a plan that depended on me being half awake and easier to intimidate than I was. The man she brought finally told the officers he thought they were coming to check on a serious situation. He said Melissa never told him she planned to try the lock herself. He said if he had known that, he never would have come. That sentence pushed the whole thing one step lower for her. Because now she was not just arguing with me. She was losing the man she had brought to support her version. I stood in the hallway listening to all of it while the dogs remained exactly where they were, calm and alert, heads angled toward the entry. Their steadiness kept my own breathing even. Outside, the porch belonged to the officers now. Melissa could still talk, but she could not steer. Then one of them asked if I was willing to email the footage first thing in the morning and provide a statement if needed. I said yes. And Melissa went quiet again. Melissa did not stay quiet for long. People like her rarely do once they realize the scene has turned against them. Silence forces them to hear how bad things already sound, and most of them would rather keep talking than sit inside that. So after a few seconds of cold air and police questions she could not answer cleanly, she tried one last move. She made herself sound offended. Not guilty. Not mistaken. Offended. She said I had created a hostile environment. She said the dogs made the situation impossible. She said the HOA was only trying to prevent future risk and that I was using fear, cameras, and intimidation to avoid cooperating with community standards. That almost would have worked on someone who had not watched the whole night from the beginning. But the officers had. They had the time. The door. The failed key. The witness. The lack of emergency. The lie about a master key. And now they had a woman trying to turn her own bad decision into my attitude problem. One of the officers asked her if the board had given her written authority to attempt entry into a private home at 4 a.m. She said the board understood the importance of emergency access. He asked if that was a yes. She did not answer. He asked if any board member had directed her to come that night. Again, no real answer. That was when the whole thing seemed to flatten into its final shape. No more fog. No more broad HOA language. Just one woman standing on a porch she never had the right to be on, trying to explain why she thought her confidence could replace consent, paperwork, and common sense. The man she brought had already stepped another pace away from her by then. Not dramatically. Just enough to make it clear he no longer wanted to be standing beside her version of the story. The officers told her she needed to leave the property immediately and that any future HOA concerns had to go through proper daytime channels, documented notice, and lawful process. No surprise visits. No self-declared emergency access. No attempts to enter. Melissa started to object. Then one of the officers repeated the instruction. Leave. Now. And for the first time all night, she had nothing left to stand on except the sound of her own mistake cooling on my porch while my dog stayed quiet behind me and the house she tried to enter remained exactly what it had been from the start. Closed. Secure. Mine. Melissa walked off my porch without another word, but silence did not save her. It just made the whole thing clearer. The officer stayed long enough to confirm my statement through the door, remind me to preserve the footage, and note the lock attempt, the fake master key claim, and the witness account. They did not need drama. The porch had already provided everything that mattered. Time. Audio. Video. A woman with no emergency, no paper, no real authority, and no idea how bad she looked once somebody finally asked her to explain herself in order. When their tires pulled away, the house went quiet again. Not empty quiet. Settled quiet. The kind that only comes after control returns fully to the person who never lost it, even when somebody outside tried very hard to break it. I stood in the hallway for a minute with the dogs still beside me, both of them calm now, ears down, job finished. No barking. No pacing. No chaos. Just two disciplined animals who had done exactly what they were trained to do when someone stupid confused darkness for permission. I checked the lock. Light scratches around the keyway. Nothing more. Then I looked at the camera feed one last time and saw the porch exactly as it had been left. Cold. Empty. Still. No emergency had ever existed there. Only Melissa, her ego, and a lie about a master key. By morning, the footage had already done more work than any argument could have. The witness she brought did not back her story. The officers did not treat it like an HOA misunderstanding. And the board, once it heard what actually happened, was forced to face the one thing people like Melissa always depend on avoiding. A clean record. Because once her fake authority was measured against timestamps, audio, a failed lock attempt, and a direct police question about the emergency that never existed. The whole performance collapsed into what it had always been. Trespass dressed as compliance. She came to my house at 4 in the morning claiming the HOA had a master key. She left with none. And the part one kept thinking about later, long after sunrise, was how simple her mistake really was. She thought the dark would make me uncertain. She thought the HOA title would make me easy to pressure. She thought a locked door was just another thing she could talk through if she sounded official enough. She forgot about the cameras. She forgot about the law. And worst of all for her, she forgot about my K9s on duty.